As you may know, when MAP 21 was passed in 2013, it required the U.S. DOT to establish performance measures that applied to the National Highway Performance Program, or the program that's used to fund the National Highway System, the NHS. And it applies to all the bridges on the NHS as well as the ramps connecting on or off an NHS route. So again, Congress directed, FHWA was directed by Congress to establish some condition-based measures for bridges and pavements. And luckily though, we've already got a good bit of data on bridges. We've had the MBI data that we've been collecting since 1970, 71, so we've got a lot of data there. And the decision was made that that's what we'll use, are the bridge component ratings from the MBI data. So there's basically kind of three classifications for assessing bridge condition that we came up with, basically, and it's percentage of deck area that's classified in good condition, or the percentage that's classified in fair condition or poor condition. Well, two of these got turned into the minimum performance measures that are required. And one is percentage of deck area classified in good condition, and the minimum or the percentage of deck area classified in poor condition or structurally deficient. And you may know we're trying to move away from the term structurally deficient. Unfortunately, Congress put structurally deficient in MAP 21, so we're still going to be using it for a while. But we are calling that poor condition now. And again, the data that we use for computing the performance measures is the MBI data. And what we use are the component rating for the deck, the superstructure, substructure, or culvert. And we use the minimum component rating. So what that means is, if you've got a bridge and you've got a deck rating of 7, a superstructure rating of 6, but a substructure rating of 4, then the 4 becomes the minimum component rating, and that's what's used to determine the performance measure. And the way this is broken down, if you go back to the MBI ratings, 6, 7, or 7, 8, or 9 are considered good, 5 or 6 are considered fair, and poor is 4 or less. And when we start talking about this is all based on deck area. It's not count. So you got to remember it's based on deck area. So this is just a formula, the way you calculate it. Basically, all you do is sum up all your deck area, whatever condition you're interested in, good, fair, poor. You sum that up, and then you divide it by your total deck area and multiply it by 100. So it's a pretty easy calculation. But there seems to have been, at least for a while, a lot of confusion. A lot of people were thinking we were talking about counts, but we're talking about deck areas. And again, we use that MBI rating, and we use the structure length, item 49, and the item 52, deck width, or item 32, the approach for roadway width, if we're talking about a bridge without a deck like a culvert. That could also apply to like an arch underfill or something like that doesn't have a deck. Also in MAP 21 in the legislation, Congress put a minimum condition and penalty provision. This part's not really covered by, we published a rule, PM3 is the rule that covers bridges. But this was part of the legislation and not really covered in the rule, but was actually established under the legislation. So what that penalty is that the deck area on the NHS and the ramps connecting to the NHS, that deck area cannot exceed 10%. So if it exceeds 10%, then we have to start looking at the penalty. So in a 3-year period, if more than 10% of the deck area is classified as structurally deficient, you then will be required to spend 50% of, we're going back to 2009 in the Highway Bridge Program now, and remember that That was not reauthorized under MAP 21, but we're still using the numbers. So you go back to 2009 and look at what your appropriation for the Highway Bridge Program was, and then you have to set 50% of that number aside for use on bridge projects on NHS. And that penalty will remain in effect until less than 10% of the deck is structurally deficient. Some other things that you need to think about with the performance measures are they are intended to be closely associated with your asset management system. So in addition to the performance measures, we also have requirements now that everyone have an asset management system. So basically we're talking about bridges and pavements for the most part. Most of us have been, I think on the bridge side we're a little bit ahead of the people on the pavement side, because we've been talking about, and most of us been doing some form of bridge management for many years. So the performance measures are intended to tie in very closely with your asset management system. And the PMs that Federal Highway has established are just considered minimums, and you're free to establish your own performance measures above and beyond those minimum ones. And I know a number of states have done that. I think pretty sure Minnesota has, because you guys were one of the pilot states. Minnesota was one of the pilot states in doing performance measures. Kansas has been doing performance measures for a while, and I think they probably have some others established, if I remember right. So, you're free to add more to it. You just can't take away from what we say you got to do. All right, something that everybody's interested in probably are some key dates. So the effective date for the performance measures was May 5th of this year. That's when the rule went into effect. One thing that everybody needs to keep in mind is, because of the extra requirements we have to do now to do some calculations and look at the penalties and those kind of things if they're going to be there, is we're going to have the data a little bit earlier than we normally have. The data has, we've always requested the data, the MBI data be submitted to us by April 1st. Well, we've moved that up by 15 days, and from now on, your data submittal will be due on March 15th. And that's the reason for that is this next date. Every year, we are required to determine what the conditions are and if you're meeting the performance measures. And we have to do that annually every year before October 1st. The reason for October 1st is because, again, getting back to my travel woes, is the fiscal year. You have to have your targets established by May 5th of next year. And you have to report those targets by October 1st of 2018. That'll be the first reporting period. And then after that, you'll have to report biennially. That's every 2 years on October 1st. You'll be able to make adjustments to your target measures in 2020. If you don't like what you've set up, you'll be able to make adjustments. And the performance period that we're looking at for the first go-around will be January 1st of 2018 and run to December 31st of 2018. So we'll be looking at bridge condition between those dates, that basically the calendar year.
Can you discuss a little bit how FHWA came up with good and poor and still has a rating system for fair but doesn't require any reporting for fair bridges?
Basically, it's just kind of what was left over. I mean, I wasn't involved in developing these things, but they're just, if we're looking at what's good and we're looking at what's poor, I mean, those are the things that matter. How many are good, how many are poor. Everything else is just kind of left in the middle. And we hope that we have more fair bridges than we do poor bridges, and the thinking and rationale for that, I don't know.
I just have two questions. So, in setting the performance targets, what happens if we are really ambitious and then fall short? Are there any repercussions as a result of that?
The ones that what we're mostly interested in are the minimum, the minimums that we've set. So I would say probably if you don't make your target measures, as long as they exceed our minimums, there wouldn't be any repercussions. But again, that's something that I'll do some research on that and get that published in the minutes or something, back an email to everybody to get you an answer on that.
Sounds good. And then just secondly is, as we set targets to go, forward, what would be your advice as far as setting those targets relevant to, future transportation funding bills? In a way, it's somewhat dependent on, funding to do the work to achieve the results.
As far as federal funding goes, I don't know, none of us have a crystal ball. I don't know. I would, I guess my best advice would be just to, you're going to have to make the assumption that federal funding that you have available now is going to continue. Because we don't know. Maybe somebody at the upper levels of FHWA has a better idea of what's coming down the road there and what the thinking is, but most of us don't know. And as far as your state funding goes, that's just something that you guys will have to look at internally and predict where your own states are going.
Seems like FHWA always carries stick and you got penalties. How about a carrot? If you're doing a good job, is there something?
Well, again, this is a lot of this stuff is stuff we're directed to do by Congress. So there's not a whole lot of, other than a good job, pat on the back. That's all FHWA usually has to hand out, unless Congress is generous enough to give us some incentive money, which we all know typically doesn't happen.
The funding seemed to me like we're struggling to do you have an idea how the federal government appropriate the money for every state? What is the formula for that? Is it?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I've looked at it in the past. I don't know exactly how it gets determined. Larry, do you have any idea how that appropriation is? Yeah, it's as far as we know down at our level, it's a black box. We don't get to see that.
I think I can address a few of the other questions that I'm aware of that Bill Oliva mentioned. If you set a target and at that midpoint you didn't hit that target, there's really no penalty other than you have to write up why, what were the reasons why you didn't achieve that target, and then possibly resetting what your next 2-year target will be. So no penalty there other than maybe a writing exercise. I think Pete's question about fair, Randy was pretty much right on target. What I've heard is there's poor, there's good, and then the difference between the two is the fair. Now, in your state's asset management plan, because that's what we're doing, preservation, if you want to have your own performance measure and target in your asset management plan for fair, you're certainly free to do that. But in terms of reporting and what the minimum is for federal highway, it's the good and the poor. And I'm trying to think of the other one, Bill, that you mentioned, the question, how you should take a look at future funding for setting your targets. In terms of federal funding, that can change as much as state. So what we're expecting is that you're taking a look at the best available data. The best available data that you have available to use, along with your bridge management system, where we're focused on bridges, and not necessarily just trends, but looking at using your best available data to make your predictions on where you think your bridge conditions will be in that 2 and that 4-year period, recognizing that bridge conditions change very slowly, so likely you're going to need to be looking further out with some of your estimations. But again, best available data is what the guidance is. Use the best available data to you. to make those estimates for your targets.
The preceding video was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found at tsp2.org. That's tsp2.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.